When Jungkook realizes his name is missing from Taehyung's guest list, secrets unravel and emotions erupt in a shocking turn of betrayal. The soft hum of the chandelier above was drowned out by the sharp intake of breath that escaped Jungkook's lips. He didn't. His voice cracked before he could finish the sentence. The sleek black envelope trembled in his hand. The one everyone in the group had received. Everyone but him. His eyes scanned the names on the official guest list again, hoping, praying that he had simply missed his own. The list, embossed with golden ink, bore a painful elegance. Jimin, Yoongi, Namjoon, Jin, Hoseok, even Bang PD, but not him. The room felt colder. The distant echo of music from Taehyung's rehearsal space filtered through the hallway of the company building. Jungkook's heart pounded, not with anger, but confusion. A biting, unbearable confusion. Only yesterday, they had stood shoulder to shoulder, smiling in a group photo. Taehyung had placed a casual hand over his shoulder. There had been laughter, the kind that made his chest warm. It was the kind of laughter you only shared with someone who knew all your silences. And now, this, the silence that swallowed Jungkook as he stood alone in the dim corridor, felt different. It wasn't the absence of sound. It was the absence of inclusion, of belonging, of whatever unspoken understanding he thought they'd always had. He reached for his phone. His fingers hovered above Taehyung's contact. He hesitated. What would he say? Why wasn't I invited? Did I do something wrong? Is this some kind of mistake? His pride warred with his ache. He locked the screen instead. Down the hall, a door clicked. Jimin appeared, still in makeup. The corners of his eyes crinkled in confusion as he spotted Jungkook. You okay? Jimin asked gently, stepping closer. Jungkook didn't speak. He simply held out the list. Jimin's smile faded the moment he saw what Jungkook meant. His jaw clenched. No, this has to be a mistake. But Jungkook didn't believe in mistakes when it came to things like this. Not with Taehyung. They'd been brothers, maybe even more, depending on the lens through which you viewed their moments. The way they protected each other from rumors. The way their glances spoke in silent language during interviews. The quiet space they carved for each other, even when the world demanded performance. Jimin touched Jungkook's arm. Let me talk to him. No. Jungkook shook his head. If he wanted me there, I'd be on the list. Taehyung had always been unpredictable, passionate, emotional, mysterious. But this wasn't a quirk of his personality. This was intentional, and that intent felt like a blade pressed softly against Jungkook's throat. The next morning, the media buzzed with excitement over Taehyung's upcoming event, a private soiree celebrating his fashion collaboration with a luxury brand. A hand-picked guest list of Korea's elite A-list musicians, industry veterans, BTS members, all except one. Fans quickly noticed Jungkook's silence. Armies speculated, hashtags exploded, and theories emerged. Some called it a scheduling conflict. Others whispered of a falling out. Photos of past moments, Taehyung resting his head on Jungkook's shoulder. Jungkook reaching out to fix Taehyung's mic resurfaced, now tinged with melancholy. Behind closed doors, the members were tense. Namjoon, ever the mediator, tried to bridge the growing chasm. Talk to him, he urged Jungkook. You don't know the full story. But Jungkook's silence had its own weight. He wasn't just hurt. He was tired of always being the one to reach out, to hold things together when the silence between them stretched too far. Memories bled in. Late-night rooftop talks. Shared dreams whispered under the same stars. The time Taehyung had shown up at his door at 2 a.m. just to say he felt like something was off. The way Jungkook had held him then, saying nothing, letting his presence do the mending. Now, there was no one at Jungkook's door. No explanation. Only silence. And a missing name. 3 days passed. The event arrived. Paparazzi lights flashed across the carpeted entrance. Taehyung appeared, a vision in velvet and silk. The crowd chanting his name. His smile was blinding, practiced, perfect. But those who looked closer, those who truly knew him, could see the flicker of conflict in his eyes. A searching. Inside the venue, he glanced over the hall. Conversations buzzed. Champagne flowed. Music played. But his eyes kept returning to the door. Jimin arrived late. Alone. Taehyung's smile faltered. You're alone? He asked, barely disguising the tremor in his voice. Jimin's gaze was sharp. Should I not be? Taehyung looked away. I meant, where's Jungkook? You should know. Jimin didn't stay long. Later that night, when the crowd dwindled and the laughter turned brittle, Taehyung stood on the balcony of the rooftop bar, overlooking the city. He pulled out his phone. A single message blinked on the screen from Jungkook. I saw the list. No emojis. No anger. No accusation. Just that. Taehyung's hand tightened around the glass in his palm. He hadn't intended for Jungkook to see it that way. Or maybe he had. Maybe some bitter, bruised part of him had wanted to see if Jungkook would fight. If he would push his way back in. But Jungkook hadn't. He had simply stepped back. Now, it was Taehyung who felt the ache. A phantom limb, the absence of someone who'd once been the other half of his sentence. His silence. His comfort. Back at his apartment, Jungkook played with his dog on the floor, the TV flickering with highlights from Taehyung's event. The sound was muted, but the visuals were loud. He reached for the remote, but paused. There, on screen, was Taehyung smiling, laughing, but when the camera caught him off guard, when he thought no one was looking, his expression slipped. It was there, in that millisecond of vulnerability that Jungkook saw it. Regret. But regret wasn't always enough. Some bonds don't break loudly. They unravel in quiet omissions, in missing names, in unasked questions. And for now, Jungkook let it remain that way. Under the dim hue of the early morning light that poured through the gauzy curtains of Jungkook's apartment, everything felt still, deceptively serene. But the silence wasn't peace, it was weighted. The kind that lingered too long after a storm, or before one. Jungkook sat on the cold kitchen tile, barefoot, a half-drunk glass of water resting beside him on the floor. He hadn't slept. Not really, just dozed in fits between flashes of old memories. The memory of Taehyung laughing beside him in the studio, looping a weird sound sample over and over until they were both in tears. The memory of a time Taehyung had shown up with takeout and no explanation, just a quiet, I didn't want to be alone tonight. All those moments felt too real last night. And now, they just felt like they belonged to someone else. The glow of his phone pulled him out of his spiral. A notification. Not from Taehyung. It was a repost of a fan edit, a split screen of their past moments together, overlaid with a mournful song, the caption in all caps, What happened to Taekook? The comment section was chaos. Accusations. Defenses. Fans pleading for clarity. Others dissecting Taehyung's every blink from the event. Every frame of the red carpet. Every shot where Jungkook should have been but wasn't. Jungkook's thumb hovered over the post. He didn't know if he wanted to scream or disappear. The doorbell rang. He flinched, startled. No one came this early. Warily, he rose and padded across the hardwood. He peered through the peephole, and for a moment, he thought he saw Taehyung. His heart jumped, then thudded when he realized it wasn't. It was Jimin. Hoodie on. Sunglasses despite the hour. Jungkook opened the door. Jimin didn't say anything at first. Just walked in, dropped a bag of pastries on the table, and flopped onto the couch like he belonged there. Like he always did. I couldn't sleep, Jimin mumbled, pulling his sunglasses off. His eyes were bloodshot. Me neither, Jungkook replied, closing the door gently behind him. There was a long silence. Just the quiet rustle of the paper bag as Jimin pulled out a croissant and bit into it half-heartedly. You should have been there, Jimin said eventually. His voice was low, almost hesitant. I know, Jungkook replied. But I wasn't. Jimin glanced at him then, really looked at him. Are you okay? No, Jungkook answered, too tired to lie. But I will be. Another pause. Jimin put the pastry down. I asked him. After I left. I called him. He didn't pick up, but he texted. Jungkook looked at him. Jimin continued. I didn't think he'd care, he wrote. Jungkook's laugh was bitter, sudden. Didn't think I'd care? He said he didn't want to make things more complicated. That you've both been distant. He thought it was mutual. Distant? Jungkook echoed, voice hard. That's what he calls it now? Jimin didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth was, things had been shifting between them for months. Not violently, not even with words. Just space. Too many missed replies, too many excuses, too many public smiles that didn't reach their eyes anymore. But Jungkook had never thought it would come to this. He sank onto the couch beside Jimin. Maybe it's my fault too. It's not about fault, Jimin said softly. It's about choice. Jungkook turned to him, something dark flickering in his expression. He chose to erase me from that night. Jimin's breath caught. Later that day, Jungkook finally left the apartment. He went to the studio, not to work, but to sit. The room was empty, the one Taehyung used to frequent before his own schedule pulled him in other directions. The faint scent of cologne lingered. Jungkook sat in the corner, pulled his knees up, and stared at the ceiling. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just sat there. Let the silence eat away at the edges of his thoughts. He knew the fans would keep pushing. Knew their silence wouldn't be enough. They would demand answers, demand reconciliation, demand truth. But what truth could he give when he didn't even understand what broke? That evening, while scrolling through unread messages, one stood out. From Hoseok. Come to the rooftop. We need to talk. Jungkook hesitated, then stood. The wind was sharp against his face when he reached the rooftop. Hoseok stood near the ledge, hands in pockets, staring out over Seoul's glowing skyline. You saw the list, Hoseok said without preamble. Jungkook nodded. I told him he was making a mistake. Jungkook didn't respond. Hoseok turned to look at him. He's not the only one hurting, Jungkook scoffed. He's the one who erased me, because he thought you were already gone. That hit harder than Jungkook expected. He kept saying you were always quiet lately, that you were somewhere else, Hoseok continued. He thought you didn't want to be part of his world anymore. Jungkook stepped back, the words colliding with his chest. And instead of asking me, he cut me off. I'm not saying he was right. I'm saying he's messed up, and maybe scared. Scared of what? Of how much you still matter. Jungkook didn't reply. The truth lingered between them, bare and raw. As Hoseok left him alone under the sky, Jungkook's phone buzzed again. A message. This time, from Taehyung. Can we talk? Jungkook stared at it. Then, without replying, he locked his screen and walked away. Not out of anger, but because some wounds needed more than words. They needed time. The city beneath him pulsed with a distant energy, but up on the rooftop, Jungkook felt like he existed on the edge of a different universe. The night air bit at his skin, sharp and cold, but he didn't move. The message from Taehyung still sat on his phone, unopened, like it carried a weight too dangerous to disturb. Can we talk? 3 words that should have meant everything, and yet felt too small now, like tossing a pebble into a crater and expecting it to fill. The wound wasn't just about the guest list. It was about everything unsaid, every look avoided, every time Taehyung had left a room a second too early, every moment Jungkook had wanted to reach out but hadn't, afraid that the silence he'd receive in return would hurt more than keeping quiet. He stayed up there long after Hoseok had gone, watching as the lights flickered off in windows across the city one by one, until the skyline looked tired too. He thought of all the times they'd stood side by side, laughing at nothing, talking about everything. He remembered the way Taehyung used to lean into him when the cameras were off, like he needed that closeness to breathe. He remembered midnight talks over ramen, arguments that ended in silence and soft apologies, songs written and never released. And now, all he had was a name that had been missing on a list. He didn't reply to the message. Not that night. He walked home through the quiet streets, with his hood up and head low, a strange ache building in his chest, the kind that didn't scream but settled like a slow bruise. The following day, Taehyung's fan sites exploded with praise for his event. Magazines called it a resounding success. Photos flooded the internet, perfectly curated smiles, luxury brand deals, polished poses, celebrities mingling like constellations in an exclusive sky. But in every frame, to Jungkook, Taehyung looked like a painting hung too straight on a crooked wall. Beautiful but off. Inauthentic in a way only someone who knew the real version could see. And Jungkook knew him. Or at least he had. That afternoon, the studio felt heavier than usual. Jungkook sat in front of the mixing console, trying to layer harmonies on a track he didn't even like anymore. Nothing sounded right. He kept adjusting the EQ, deleting entire stems, starting over, until the project file was empty, and so was his chest. The door opened behind him quietly. He didn't turn, but he knew the rhythm of those footsteps. He didn't have to look. Taehyung didn't speak immediately. He stood by the door like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to enter. The air between them was thick. Jungkook didn't acknowledge him. Minutes passed. The silence was brutal. "I thought I was protecting something," Taehyung finally said, his voice quiet, uncertain. Jungkook's shoulders tensed. "By erasing me? I didn't want you to be dragged into the chaos." Jungkook turned, slowly. His eyes were sharp. "You think I haven't already lived in chaos? We were in it together. Always." Taehyung looked away. "It hasn't felt that way in a while. You should have said something," Jungkook muttered. "And you should have noticed." Taehyung snapped back, then immediately regretted the bite in his tone. He exhaled and stepped forward. "I didn't mean that." Jungkook stood, facing him. There was hurt in his gaze, but more than that, there was disappointment. "I didn't need an invitation to know we were drifting. I felt it every time you left a conversation early, every time you smiled, and it didn't reach your eyes. But I held on. I told myself it would pass, that we were just tired, that you'd come back, that we would come back. I was scared," Taehyung said, "of losing control, of needing you too much, of the rumors, the expectations, of what we were becoming." "And what were we becoming?" Jungkook asked. Taehyung met his gaze. "Something I didn't know how to define." They stood in that space, full of everything unsaid, and let the truth settle. "I didn't mean to hurt you," Taehyung whispered. "But you did," Jungkook replied, his voice steady. "And not just by leaving my name off a list." "I know," Taehyung said, voice breaking. "I miss you." Jungkook didn't answer. His throat tightened. For a moment, he wanted to close the distance between them, to hug him, to scream, to cry, to ask why it had to go this far, but he didn't. Because forgiveness wasn't a switch you flip. It was something that had to be rebuilt. Brick by painful brick. He walked past Taehyung and out the door, leaving the room behind, leaving the air still charged with something unfinished. In the days that followed, the two of them existed like ghosts in each other's orbits. Messages were left unread. Opportunities to meet were declined. The group rehearsals were quieter. The others noticed, but didn't push. They had seen them fall apart before, only to come back stronger. But this time, the cracks seemed deeper, different. Not from a fight, but from too many near-silent moments of not showing up. Then came the interview. It was meant to be casual promotional for an upcoming campaign. All 7 members seated in a semicircle, laughing about old memories. But when the host jokingly asked about the guest list from Taehyung's event, everyone shifted uncomfortably. The tension was palpable. The host laughed it off, but cameras caught the flicker in Jungkook's expression. And they caught the way Taehyung didn't look at him once during the entire segment. The clip went viral in hours. Hashtags trended. Not even eye contact? Was that sadness in Jungkook's smile? Taekook is over? The silence was no longer theirs to control. The public had seen too much, heard too little, and they wanted more. Later that night, Jungkook stood on his balcony, staring out at the city again. He played the video once, then again, watched the moment his smile faltered. The exact second Taehyung laughed at something Yoongi said, his gaze deliberately not drifting his way. Jungkook's heart clenched, not because Taehyung didn't look, but because he used to. Always. And now, he couldn't. The doorbell rang again. This time, it was Taehyung. Jungkook opened the door and didn't speak. Taehyung stepped inside, not waiting for permission. He looked more tired than Jungkook had ever seen him. Like the weight of their silence had finally become too much to carry. "I saw the video," he said. Jungkook nodded. "So did the rest of the world. They saw what we didn't say." Jungkook leaned against the wall. "You ready to say it now?" Taehyung didn't answer with words. He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. Jungkook took it hesitantly. Inside, a new guest list. At the top, handwritten in bold letters. Asterisk. John Jungkook, asterisk. Below it, a date. A smaller, private gathering. Just them. No cameras. No brands. No expectations. Just space to talk, to heal. I want to fix this, Taehyung said. If you'll let me. Jungkook's eyes didn't leave the envelope. Why now? Because I realized that losing you wasn't something I could just learn to live with. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't hollow. It was full of things mending. Slowly, Jungkook finally looked up. I'm not promising it'll be easy. Taehyung smiled faintly. I'm not asking for easy. I'm asking for honest. And for the first time in weeks, something inside Jungkook loosened. He reached out, took a deep breath, and said, Then let's start there. The living room was dim, the only light coming from the faint glow of the hallway behind Taehyung, casting soft shadows over the worn couch and the silent television that had long stopped displaying anything but a still screen. Jungkook stood with the envelope still in his hand, his name written in Taehyung's handwriting, staring back at him like a quiet apology. He didn't know how long he just looked at it, but time seemed suspended between them, the air carrying the weight of everything that hadn't been said in months. Taehyung hadn't moved either. He stood still, like he was afraid that if he stepped too close, the fragile piece might fracture. Jungkook slowly placed the envelope on the table, his eyes flicking up to meet Taehyung's, searching them for something, maybe sincerity, maybe regret, maybe the truth he had wanted for far too long. When? Jungkook finally asked, his voice low but steady. Friday night, Taehyung answered. I rented a small place. Quiet, no cameras, just space for us, if you come. The words hung between them, like a delicate thread. Just us? Jungkook said, not accusing, just needing to hear it. Just us, Taehyung confirmed. And the truth, all of it. Jungkook didn't reply. He didn't need to yet. The mere fact that he didn't shut the door in Taehyung's face spoke volumes, and Taehyung knew that. He nodded once, as if respecting the silence, then turned and left without pushing further, the door clicking softly shut behind him. The next few days stretched long and thin. Jungkook tried to lose himself in routines, gym, vocal, warm-ups, rehearsals, but everything felt mechanical, like his body was going through the motions while his mind was caught in a loop. Every corner of the building reminded him of something. Taehyung laughing in the practice room mirror reflections, the notes he used to leave on Jungkook's lyric sheets, the way he always arrived 5 minutes late with 2 coffees, and a strange story about traffic that Jungkook never believed but always smiled at anyway. He wanted to be angry, to stay guarded, but he couldn't erase years of connection just because of one fracture. Even if that fracture had been deep, he replayed Taehyung's voice in his head. That quiet admission, I want to fix this, and the way he had looked like he was holding on to hope with both hands. Friday came faster than he expected. Jungkook stood in front of the mirror, longer than necessary, staring at his own reflection like he was trying to figure out who he needed to be that night. Not as a performer, not as the youngest of BTS, but as a man sitting across from someone who had broken something sacred and might be trying to put it back together. When he arrived at the address on the invitation, it was raining lightly. The soft patter of water on the sidewalk echoed in the quiet neighborhood, the kind where homes stood with warm windows and still gardens, untouched by the chaos of city life. The house was simple, 2 stories with warm lighting spilling from behind drawn curtains. Jungkook hesitated before walking up to the door, heart thudding louder than his footsteps. He raised his hand to knock, then paused when the door opened before he touched it. Taehyung stood there, as if he had been waiting just behind the wood the entire time. For a beat, they just stared at each other. You came, Taehyung said, a soft breath of relief. You asked, Jungkook replied. Taehyung stepped aside without another word, letting Jungkook enter. The interior was quiet, intimate. A low hum of jazz played softly from speakers in the corner, and the scent of jasmine and cinnamon lingered faintly in the air. There was no staff, no elaborate setup. Just a modest table set for 2, a kettle on the stove, and a guitar resting beside the window like it had been played earlier and left where the music had stopped. "I wasn't sure if you'd walk through that door," Taehyung admitted, his voice careful. "I wasn't either," Jungkook said honestly. They sat across from each other at the table, the distance between them somehow more profound than it appeared. Taehyung poured the tea himself. Chamomile. He didn't try to make small talk. He didn't try to smile. "I thought, if I just let things fade quietly, they wouldn't hurt as much," he began. "I thought we'd both be too busy to notice. I thought time would make the distance make sense. But it didn't," Jungkook said softly. "No," Taehyung agreed, eyes meeting his. "It made it worse." There was a pause as Taehyung took a breath. "Do you want to know why I didn't put your name on that list?" Jungkook's heart tensed again, but he nodded. "Because I didn't want to see you there and feel like we were pretending." The words hit harder than expected. "I didn't want to smile at you across a crowded room and not recognize what we used to be," Taehyung said, his voice trembling. "I thought if I left you out, it would be cleaner. Like ripping off a bandage instead of letting it rot slowly." Jungkook's fingers curled slightly around the rim of his cup. "But all I did was hurt you," Taehyung added, "and myself." They sat in silence. The jazz continued softly in the background, unbothered by the emotional storm brewing in the room. "I needed you," Jungkook finally said. "All these months. I needed you to be the one who said something first, and when you didn't, I started wondering if I mattered to you at all anymore." Taehyung closed his eyes, like the confession burned. "You've always mattered," he said, looking up. "More than I knew how to say. I didn't need a performance. I just needed you to call." "I know," Taehyung whispered.
"And instead," Jungkook continued, his voice heavier, "I found out I was missing from your celebration like I had never existed in your life at all. I didn't know how to face you," Taehyung admitted. "I was scared, not of you but of what I'd done, of what I'd let happen." "I would have forgiven you if you had just told me the truth," Jungkook said. "I didn't think I deserved forgiveness," Taehyung murmured. They stared at each other then, and in that moment something shifted. Not everything was healed, but the ice had cracked. "Can we start again?" Taehyung asked, voice barely audible. Jungkook didn't respond immediately. He looked around the room, at the care Taehyung had put into creating this quiet space, at the guitar, the scent, the silence. "We don't need to start again," Jungkook finally said. "We just need to stop running." Taehyung looked at him, eyes soft, brimming. They sat there for hours talking, not as idols, not as legends, just two men who had lost each other in the chaos of fame and fear and unspoken pain. They spoke about what went wrong, about their insecurities, their misunderstandings, about the pressure that made it feel easier to distance than to deal. Jungkook told him how abandoned he felt. Taehyung told him how terrified he was of ruining the most important bond he had. And slowly, word by word, they filled the silence. By the time the sky began to lighten in shades of blue and gray, they were no longer across from each other. They were side by side on the couch, legs curled, heads resting back against the cushions, the space between them no longer cold. Taehyung turned his head slightly. "Stay a bit longer?" he asked. Jungkook nodded. "Yeah, I'll stay." And in that quiet morning, after months of silence, they began to write a new chapter, not with grand declarations or promises, but with presence, with honesty, with choosing not to leave again, of course. Here's the long-form continuation of the story in immersive, cinematic English prose, directly continuing where the previous scene left off, maintaining the emotional depth, packing, and uninterrupted style you've requested. The city outside began to stir while the rest of the world remained wrapped in its early haze. Morning light spilled gently through the wide window panes, touching the edges of the hardwood floor with a golden softness. Inside the living room, the warmth between them had taken a different shape, quieter now, but no longer strained. Jungkook hadn't meant to fall asleep, but with the way Taehyung had shifted slightly closer, with his presence calm and familiar beside him, sleep had finally crept in like a small forgiveness. His head had tilted, resting lightly against Taehyung's shoulder. Neither had spoken for the last hour, but the silence no longer felt loaded or hostile. It felt earned, lived in, like two souls relearning how to be close without expectation or pain. Taehyung barely moved. He just let himself be still, as if afraid that any sudden motion would break whatever delicate thing had finally begun to rebuild between them. Jungkook's breath was soft and even, his lashes brushing his skin, lips parted just slightly as he sank deeper into that half-peaceful, half-vulnerable sleep that comes only after too many nights of unrest. And Taehyung watched him, not with guilt, not with regret anymore, but with something rawer, a gentle ache for all the time lost. All the laughter they hadn't shared in recent months, all the phone calls that never happened, all the music they didn't finish. He had never stopped caring. He had just stopped knowing how to show it. Jungkook stirred slightly, a soft inhale, and then his eyes blinked open slowly. The first thing he saw was the morning sun hitting the ceiling, then the weight of the warmth against his side, then the curve of Taehyung's shoulder still unmoved. He didn't jerk away. He didn't feel awkward. He just breathed, slowly, carefully, letting his mind adjust to the fact that for the first time in too long, they were in the same room, not as public figures forced to coexist, but as two people who had once meant the world to each other and were now trying to mean something again. "I didn't mean to fall asleep," Jungkook whispered, voice still raspy from sleep. Taehyung turned his head slowly, a small smile playing on his lips. "I didn't want to wake you." There was something soft in the exchange, something real. Jungkook sat up a little straighter, running a hand through his tousled hair, eyes flicking to the empty mug on the table, to the untouched guitar near the window. "Did you sleep at all?" he asked. Taehyung shook his head once, eyes lingering on Jungkook. "Didn't need to. I think I slept the moment you walked in." That made Jungkook's lips twitch into a barely there smile. There was history in those words, history only they could understand. "I've been thinking," Taehyung said after a pause. "Maybe we both got too good at pretending we were okay, pretending we didn't miss each other, pretending the distance was normal." "It started small," Jungkook murmured, eyes cast downward. "One day you answered slower. The next I stopped calling, then schedules took over, and suddenly we were strangers." Taehyung leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "But I never stopped caring." Jungkook looked at him. "Then why didn't you fight for me?" "I thought I had to let you go to keep things clean." "But we were never clean," Jungkook said, the words coming faster now. "We were messy and honest and intense, and that's what made us real." Taehyung's throat bobbed. "I was scared of being real with you, because being real meant admitting you meant more to me than I ever let myself say." The admission floated in the morning light, fragile but powerful. Jungkook swallowed hard. "I would have rather heard that months ago." "I know," Taehyung whispered, "but maybe I needed to lose you to understand just how badly I needed you in the first place." Silence again, but the kind that cracks open space for healing. "Are you saying you want to try again?" Jungkook asked carefully, his voice devoid of anger now, just quiet hope. Taehyung looked at him unflinching. "No, I'm saying I never wanted us to end." Jungkook nodded once slowly. "Then stop treating me like someone who can be written off." "I promise," Taehyung said, almost a whisper, "never again." They didn't hug. They didn't make a grand gesture, but something shifted in the energy between them. A realignment. A rechoosing. Jungkook stood and walked toward the window, staring out at the city now bathed in full light. He could see the morning traffic, people beginning their day, lives being lived without knowing anything about the storm he and Taehyung had weathered. Taehyung came to stand beside him, arms crossed loosely as he followed Jungkook's gaze. "You think we'll be okay?" Jungkook asked. Taehyung was quiet for a moment. "I think we'll be better than okay. I think we'll be honest." Jungkook nodded, but a small laugh escaped him, dry and self-aware. "We're going to need time." "You'll have all of mine," Taehyung replied without hesitation. The sincerity in that made Jungkook's chest ache. Later that afternoon, after sharing a quiet meal and even a few low chuckles about things that once felt too sharp to remember, they stepped outside together. The breeze was cool and wrapped around them like silk. No cameras, no stylists, no handlers, just two friends, two brothers trying again. They walked down the quiet street together, shoulders brushing from time to time, the air full of unspoken understandings. When Jungkook reached his bike, parked near the lamppost, he turned to Taehyung and tilted his head. "Want a ride?" Taehyung grinned. "Are you offering or testing me?" Jungkook raised a brow. "Both." Taehyung slid behind him, arms wrapping gently around Jungkook's waist like they used to in the early days, back when trust came easier and fear hadn't wedged itself between their breaths. As Jungkook kicked off the stand and pushed forward, they rode in silence through the streets, the wind catching their hair, the hum of tires on asphalt rhythmic and grounding. It didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to be real. When they reached the Han River, Jungkook stopped. They sat together at the bank, watching the water ripple under the glow of the setting sun. Taehyung skipped a stone. Jungkook watched the circles it made on the surface. "Remember that night we came here after our first concert?" Taehyung said, voice distant but soft. "You climbed the railing," Jungkook recalled, "tried to yell your name into the wind. You stopped me. You would have fallen." Taehyung looked at him then. "You always stopped me from falling." Jungkook didn't look away, then stopped pushing me away. And just like that, it clicked again. The ache wasn't gone. But it no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a scar forming, something earned, something survived. They talked until the sun dipped low, until stars blinked awake in the dark velvet sky, until laughter didn't feel foreign in their throats anymore. By the time they parted that night, there was no goodbye, just a quiet promise in the way their eyes met, a beginning again. And sometimes that was more powerful than any invitation. Of course. Below is the long-form continuation of the story, written in immersive, uninterrupted English prose, maintaining the deep emotional tone, cinematic style, and complex character dynamics from the previous parts. The river shimmered under the night sky, reflecting the moonlight in a soft, rippling glow. The wind carried the scent of wet grass and faint memories, of summer nights long ago when things were simpler and hearts weren't so heavy. Jungkook leaned back on his hands, legs stretched out in front of him, and glanced sideways at Taehyung, who was lying on the grass with his arms crossed behind his head, eyes tracing constellations above. They hadn't spoken for a while, and they didn't need to. The silence between them had changed, no longer brittle and sharp, but warm, with quiet acknowledgement. Jungkook exhaled slowly, watching the condensation curl from his breath into the cool air. "You remember when we used to come here after rehearsals, just to complain about the world?" Taehyung smiled faintly. "We thought no one was listening, but the staff used to say they could hear us from the other side of the parking lot." Jungkook chuckled, head dropping slightly. "We were dramatic." "We still are," Taehyung replied softly, turning his head toward him. "Just quieter about it now." A beat passed. The breeze rustled the leaves overhead, and a couple biked past on the path behind them, their laughter echoing briefly before fading. It reminded Jungkook of all the versions of themselves that had existed in this city. Before the fame, during the rise, through the exhaustion, and now here after the silence. Jungkook rested his elbows on his knees. It felt like something broke that night. Taehyung didn't ask which night. He knew. The night of the event, the missing name, the public absence, the private devastation. "I know," he answered. "It broke for me too, I just hid it better." "Was that your plan all along?" Jungkook asked, not bitter, just tired. "To pretend like I didn't exist?" Taehyung sat up slowly, drawing his knees to his chest. "No, I never wanted to erase you. I wanted to protect us, but I went about it the wrong way." "Protect us from what?" Jungkook asked, looking over at him, voice taut. From being seen together, from the questions. Taehyung's jaw clenched slightly. From becoming the version of us that couldn't survive under pressure. We were already surviving, Jungkook said quietly. We were just doing it apart. Taehyung nodded once slowly, and that's the part I regret the most. They sat there under the open sky, two silhouettes against the vastness of the city they had conquered and been conquered by. For a long time, neither spoke. The weight of the past months wasn't something that could be lifted with one conversation, but it could begin to be carried together. Jungkook stood after a while, brushing the grass off his jeans. "Come on," he said, nudging Taehyung's foot with his own. "I'll race you to the bridge." Taehyung blinked. "Race? Unless you're afraid you'll lose." Taehyung's smile returned, lazy but real. "You're on." They ran, laughing like they hadn't in months. Like they were boys again, not weighed down by contracts or expectations or the pain of silence. Jungkook's laughter rang out first, and Taehyung followed close behind, matching his steps across the concrete until they both reached the edge of the bridge, panting and breathless. Jungkook leaned over the railing, hands gripping the cool metal. "God," he gasped, "I forgot how fast you were." "I forgot how fast you were," Taehyung countered, chest heaving. They stood there side by side, catching their breath in silence. Jungkook turned toward him after a moment. "You ever think we'd be back here like this?" Taehyung looked at him, eyes honest. "I didn't know if you'd let me back in." Jungkook stared at him for a moment longer. "I didn't know either." And that was the truth. It wasn't about who was right. It was about what had been lost, and what might still be found. The days that followed weren't perfect, but they were real. Taehyung started sending messages again, short ones, sometimes just a picture of his morning coffee or a lyric that reminded him of something they'd once written. Jungkook replied, sometimes with emojis, sometimes with silence, but it was a start. In the next rehearsal, when their names were called, they stood next to each other again. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Their members noticed, of course, but no one said anything. It was enough just to see them laughing at the same joke, nudging each other between takes, sharing glances like they used to before the distance built walls between them. One afternoon, as they were packing up from a shoot, Jungkook walked past Taehyung and paused. "You still have that guitar?" Taehyung looked up. "The one from the apartment." "Yeah," Jungkook said. "Let's finish that song." Taehyung blinked. "You remember it?" Jungkook gave a small smile. "I never forgot it." They met that evening in the same place, Taehyung's small apartment above the art gallery that no one knew he owned. It was quiet, private, the kind of place where time didn't matter. They sat down with the guitar between them. Taehyung strummed a familiar chord, and Jungkook hummed the melody that had been stuck in both their heads since before the silence began. The song came back like it had been waiting for them. It wasn't just a melody, it was a conversation. Taehyung played the chord progression. Jungkook added harmonies. The lyrics were different now, deeper, more reflective. A story of getting lost, of almost giving up, of finding a way back. And in that music, they spoke all the things they hadn't been brave enough to say. "I thought you were gone," Taehyung sang. "I thought you closed the door," Jungkook answered. "But I never stopped listening. I never stopped hopping." They didn't plan to record it. Not yet. It was theirs first. Later that night, Taehyung looked at him across the room. "Do you forgive me?" Jungkook looked down at his hands, then back at him. "Not all at once," he admitted, "but I'm trying." Taehyung nodded. "I'll wait." "No more waiting," Jungkook said, standing, "just moving forward." They walked to the window together, watching the lights of the city blink beneath them. Taehyung reached out slowly, and Jungkook didn't pull away. Their hands brushed, then clasped. There was no need for another apology. Just presence. And for now, that was enough. Of course. Here is the immersive, uninterrupted continuation of the story, carrying forward the emotional tone, complexity, and cinematic packing, directly following the last moment of reconnection between Jungkook and Taehyung, as requested. The rain returned days later, not heavy, but persistent, like the sky couldn't quite decide if it was morning or cleansing. Jungkook stood by the glass window of the studio, headphones around his neck, a mug of half-finished coffee in his hand, watching the droplets gather and slip down like memories too full to hold. Behind him, Taehyung adjusted the microphone stand without speaking, careful, precise, as if reverence had taken root in the space between them. They hadn't spoken much that morning, but it wasn't the silence of absence anymore. It was the kind that lived between people who were rebuilding something delicate, something they didn't want to shatter again. The last few weeks had been tentative, real. Some days were lighter, like when they laughed over old dance practice videos or when Jungkook mock-scolded Taehyung for forgetting lyrics during sound check. Other days were quiet. Healing wasn't linear, and neither of them pretended it was, but they were trying. The studio lights cast a soft glow across the wooden panels. Jungkook turned from the window, watching Taehyung hum to himself as he ran through the bridge of the song they had once written, back when things were simpler and complicated all at once. Jungkook sat beside the keyboard, eyes tracing the familiar chords, letting his fingers fall naturally into place. The music had always been their language, even when words failed. Taehyung looked over at him. "You remember the harmony you added during the sole rehearsal, the one right before the last chorus?" Jungkook nodded. "The one you told me sounded like forgiveness." "Yeah," Taehyung said, almost smiling. "Can we use it?" Jungkook played the notes, soft, fragile, like a hand held out after a storm. The sound settled into the air like dust on light, lingering long after the keys were released. Taehyung stepped closer, voice lower now. "When I heard that note live, I knew you hadn't given up on us, not completely." Jungkook didn't answer, but his hands remained on the keys, still playing. They worked for hours, shaping, stretching, layering sound. At one point, Taehyung stood behind Jungkook, watching his fingers move, noticing the quiet furrow in his brow, the way he still bit his lower lip when he was concentrating. Taehyung leaned closer without thinking, eyes trained on the same melody line, breath brushing just past Jungkook's shoulder. For a second, the air grew thick again. Jungkook didn't move, but his fingers slowed. Taehyung's voice was quiet. "Do you think it's possible to go back to how things used to be?" Jungkook lifted his eyes, met his gaze in the reflection of the piano lid. "I don't think we're meant to," he said honestly, "but maybe we can become something new." Taehyung studied him, "Something better." Jungkook's voice was soft, "Something true." That night after the session, they didn't go their separate ways. They walked together along the Han River again, hands tucked into their pockets, shoulder to shoulder. The wind was cold, but it carried the scent of spring pushing through the edge of winter. Renewal, change. Taehyung paused near the water, squatting down to pick up a stone. He held it in his palm for a moment, then skipped it across the surface. 1, 2, 3 skips before it disappeared. "That's the most it skipped in years," he said, surprised. Jungkook crouched beside him. "You always used to throw them too high, no follow-through." Taehyung laughed, the sound clear and unguarded. "You used to say I had no patience." "You still don't." Taehyung tilted his head. "Maybe that's why I lost you." Jungkook turned to him. "You didn't lose me." Taehyung didn't speak. Jungkook added, "You just stopped reaching." Taehyung looked down at the stone in his hand, then slowly offered it to Jungkook. "Then reach for me this time," he said. Jungkook took it. Later that evening, they found themselves in a small restaurant tucked into a quiet corner of Seoul, the kind of place with fogged-up windows and soft jazz playing from a dusty speaker above the kitchen. It was the same one they used to go to after late-night practices when they wanted to eat without being recognized. Just two boys craving ramen and quiet. The owner smiled when he saw them. He didn't ask for pictures, didn't ask questions, just pointed to their usual corner and said, "Been a while, hasn't it?" They sat at the same table, the same worn wood etched with initials from strangers. Jungkook ordered spicy ramen with an egg. Taehyung got kimchi stew. No cameras, no pressure, just 2 bowls of steam and warmth between them. Jungkook stirred his soup absent-mindedly. Do you ever wish we could disappear for a while, just go somewhere no one knows us? Taehyung leaned forward, resting his chin on his palm. Every day. Where would you go? Taehyung thought about it. Somewhere with no Wi-Fi, maybe a lake house, just music, books, silence. Jungkook smiled faintly. You'd last a day, then you'd start craving a city. Taehyung laughed. Maybe, but if you were there, I'd stay longer. The words hung between them like something delicate but alive. Jungkook looked down. You say things like that now so easily. I always wanted to, Taehyung said. I was just scared you'd think I meant something I shouldn't. And now, I mean everything I say. Jungkook nodded once. That was all he needed. By the time they left the restaurant, it was past midnight. They walked in silence again, this time slower, more settled. As they reached Jungkook's place, Taehyung stopped. You want to come up? Jungkook asked. Taehyung hesitated. Will it be weird? Jungkook shook his head. Not unless we make it. So they did. Inside, everything looked the same. Minimalist, warm lighting. A few pictures still framed on the shelf, one of them, blurry from laughter, caught mid-shout on a rooftop years ago. Taehyung walked over to it. You kept this? He asked. Jungkook leaned against the wall. Some things you don't throw away, even when they hurt. Taehyung turned toward him. Do I still hurt you? Jungkook met his gaze, not like before. Taehyung stepped closer, and now. Jungkook didn't move. Now you just confuse me. Taehyung reached up, gently brushing a strand of hair behind Jungkook's ear. His hand lingered. Do you want me to stop? Jungkook's breath caught. No. And in that moment, with the city asleep around them, with memories pressed into every corner of the room, Taehyung leaned in. Their foreheads touched first, then noses, then finally the kind of kiss that wasn't about answers, just about being present, just about letting everything unsaid dissolve into the quiet. It didn't promise forever, but it promised now. And for once, that was enough, of course. Here's the seamless continuation of the narrative in immersive, cinematic English prose, directly extending the scene after their quiet kiss, deepening their emotional rediscovery, vulnerability, and rebuilding of trust, without formatting breaks, numbers, or episodic labeling, just pure, uninterrupted storytelling as requested. Taehyung's lips were soft, trembling slightly against Jungkook, as if they weren't entirely sure if they were allowed to be there. But Jungkook didn't pull away. He stayed still, heart racing, not because of surprise, but because of everything the moment held, the history, the years, the fractures, the longing. The kiss wasn't dramatic. It wasn't hungry. It was the kind of kiss shared between two people who had been lost for a long time and had just started to find their way back. Slow, hesitant, reverent. When they finally parted, neither of them moved back completely. Their foreheads remained pressed together, breaths shallow, hearts sinking into the same uncertain rhythm. Outside, the city glowed silently, windows flickering like faraway stars, unaware of the quiet undoing happening inside Jungkook's living room. Taehyung's voice broke the silence first, a whisper so fragile it almost disappeared into the space between them. I don't know what this means yet. Jungkook nodded slowly. Me neither. But I don't want to lose this again, Taehyung said, eyes closed now, as if saying it hurt but not saying it would have been worse. Jungkook opened his eyes and stared at him. Then don't walk away next time. I won't, Taehyung promised, not unless you ask me to. There was no need to say anything more. Jungkook gently pulled him to the couch, and they sank into it together, not as lovers, not as idols, but as two souls finally letting the silence dissolve. They didn't speak much after that. Words weren't needed. Taehyung curled up beside Jungkook, his head resting lightly against his chest, listening to the beat that had steadied him through so many rehearsals, so many shows, so many years. Jungkook's hand found his hair instinctively, fingertips brushing through the soft strands with a familiarity that made something deep inside Taehyung relax. It wasn't the beginning of a new love story. It wasn't a confession. It was just comfort, connection, the choice to be here in this moment fully. They drifted off sometime after 3 a.m., the TV flickering in the background with old muted performances playing on loop. When Jungkook stirred awake a few hours later, it was still dark, but the dawn was hinting at the edge of the sky. He looked down at Taehyung, sleeping so peacefully, lashes resting against his cheeks, lips slightly parted, one arm tucked beneath his cheek. Something in Jungkook's chest clenched a soft ache. Not pain, something else, something quieter. He didn't want to move, didn't want to break whatever spell the night had cast, but his phone buzzed faintly on the table beside them, a reminder of the world that still existed outside this room. He reached for it quietly, a message from their manager, a schedule update, interviews, meetings, camera fittings. He sighed and turned off the screen. Taehyung stirred then, shifting slightly before blinking up at him. "Did I drool on you?" he mumbled. Jungkook smiled, just a little. Taehyung grinned sleepily, stretching like a cat, then winced. "Why does your couch feel like a pile of rocks?" "Because it is," Jungkook said. "You insisted I buy the artisanal minimalist one last year." Taehyung blinked. "Oh right, it's terrible." "I know." They laughed softly, the kind of laugh that only comes in the early hours when the world still feels a little unreal. As the sun began to rise, casting a gentle amber light into the apartment, they made their way to the kitchen. Taehyung rummaged through the cupboards like he owned the place, and maybe he had, once in a way. Jungkook watched as he pulled down mismatched mugs, started boiling water, and reached for the same tea they used to drink when insomnia dragged them into 4 a.m. songwriting. Jungkook leaned on the counter. "So, now what?" Taehyung didn't look up as he spoke. "Now we go slow." "Slow?" Jungkook raised an eyebrow. "Yeah," Taehyung said, placing 2 mugs on the counter. "No rushing, no pressure, no pretending we have everything figured out. We take one day at a time." Jungkook exhaled. "I can do slow." Taehyung finally looked up, eyes searching his. "And if it gets hard again?" "We talk," Jungkook said without hesitation. "We don't disappear." Taehyung nodded. "Okay." They spent the rest of the day together, not clinging but not avoiding either. Taehyung stayed while Jungkook practiced vocals in the studio room, curled up on the floor with a notebook and pencil, sketching something abstract, humming under his breath. Jungkook didn't question it. He found comfort in the rhythm of having him near again. Later, they ordered food, too much, as usual, and ate on the floor with their backs against the wall, legs stretched out, the sound of quiet music filling the gaps. The phone rang a few times throughout the day. Messages came in, but neither of them answered. For once, they let the world wait. That night, as the stars returned and the city settled once more into its nighttime hush, Jungkook walked Taehyung to the door. Not because he wanted him to leave, but because it felt important to do this right. To not blur lines they weren't ready to cross. Taehyung looked at him before stepping out. "I don't know where we'll end up." "I don't either," Jungkook admitted. "But I want to keep showing up." Jungkook nodded. "Then I'll be here." Taehyung smiled. It wasn't the broad, showy one fans knew. It was smaller, warmer, honest. "Good night, Jungkook." "Night, T." And with that, he left. Jungkook stood at the door for a long moment, heart full in a way that didn't ache anymore, just pulsed, steady and sure. The next weeks passed slowly, just like they agreed. They didn't talk every day, but when they did, it mattered. Sometimes it was a late-night phone call. Sometimes a shared meal after rehearsals. Sometimes a small note slipped into a lyric folder. They weren't rushing toward a definition. They were letting themselves become again. Taehyung showed up at Jungkook's dance practice one afternoon, water bottle in hand, wearing sunglasses indoors like an idiot. Jungkook nearly tripped laughing. Later, Taehyung came to the studio with a beat he'd been working on, rough, chaotic, but interesting. Jungkook layered vocals over it and something sparked. That weekend, they recorded it properly, just the two of them, like old times. No pressure, no promises. Word started to get around. The staff noticed the difference. The members noticed too, but no one said anything directly. Not until Jimin cornered Jungkook in the dressing room after a shoot. "You seem lighter," Jimin said, handing him a towel. Jungkook raised an eyebrow. "Lighter? Like you're not carrying everything alone anymore." Jungkook thought about it, smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm not." Jimin leaned against the counter. "He missed you." "I missed him too." Jimin nodded once. "Then don't lose it again." "We're trying." "Good," Jimin said. "Because whatever it is between you two, it's always been real." That night, Jungkook stood at his window again, phone in hand. He debated sending a message. Then he didn't. Instead, a knock came at the door. Taehyung stood there, hands in his pockets. "Did you know I'd come?" he asked. Jungkook stepped aside, smiling. "No, but I hoped." And sometimes hope was enough. Jungkook stepped back, letting the door swing open just wide enough for Taehyung to enter. The moment Taehyung crossed the threshold, the atmosphere shifted, not in a way that was tense, but in a way that was heavy with possibility. He wasn't carrying anything. No bag, no phone in hand. Just himself, wrapped in that quiet way he always had when he didn't know exactly what to say, but still wanted to be close. He walked in slowly, gaze flickering around the apartment as if reacquainting himself with each piece of furniture, each detail, like all the time he'd spent away had subtly changed everything, even though nothing had moved. Jungkook closed the door gently and leaned against it for a second, his eyes on the back of Taehyung's head, watching as the older man wandered to the window, hands tucked into his coat pockets. Outside, the city lights were spilling across the skyline like spilled ink, gold and white and restless blue. The hum of Seoul at night was familiar background noise. But in here, it felt like another world, sealed off and untouched by the chaos waiting beyond the glass. Taehyung didn't speak for a while. Jungkook didn't rush him. They had learned not to force the quiet. It had become a part of them now, no longer a weapon but a canvas. Eventually, Taehyung turned his head just slightly. "I was walking," he said. "It was cold. I passed the street where we used to get those sweet potato fritters from that old lady near the river." Jungkook tilted his head, remembering. "You always bought 5 and ate 2. "You always ate the other 3, Taehyung said with a faint smile. "I didn't mind." Jungkook walked toward him, slow steps, arms folded loosely across his chest. "You used to say it made you feel like you had someone to finish what you started." Taehyung turned to face him then. "I still feel that way." They stood in front of each other now, not touching, not smiling too wide, just breathing in the same space again. "You didn't text," Jungkook said quietly. "I didn't want to ask if I could come over," Taehyung replied. "I just wanted to know if you'd still open the door." "You always had the key." "I thought I lost it." "I didn't change the lock," Jungkook murmured, his voice almost a whisper. A silence passed between them, intimate and long. Taehyung stepped closer. "I don't know what we're doing." Jungkook exhaled. "Neither do I. But I want to keep doing it." This time Jungkook smiled. "Then stay." Taehyung let his coat slide off his shoulders and tossed it onto the couch without looking. Jungkook turned on the heater, the low mechanical buzz filling the room as warmth began to push against the corners. They moved into the kitchen without words. Jungkook opened a cupboard and pulled out 2 mugs. Taehyung stood beside him like he'd never left, like no distance had passed between the last time he was here and now. They made tea, chamomile again, maybe out of habit, maybe out of hope. Taehyung leaned on the counter, watching Jungkook stir the water absently. "Do you ever wonder what we would have been without all this, without the cameras, without the noise?" Jungkook looked up. "Sometimes, But then I remember that the noise is what brought us together in the first place. Taehyung nodded, lips pressed together. Still, I wish we had a version of us that was just simple. I don't think we've ever been simple, Jungkook said, but maybe we don't need to be. Taehyung took his tea and walked back to the couch, sinking into it like someone trying to remember how to rest. Jungkook joined him, their knees brushing, the space between them narrow and charged but not uncomfortable. They sipped in silence. Occasionally their shoulders would press together slightly. Neither pulled away. As the night deepened, their conversation moved gently. Memories, random things they missed, thoughts they had during performances when they caught glimpses of each other but didn't speak. Jungkook admitted he used to hum their unfinished song under his breath during breaks, hoping it might find its way back to them. Taehyung confessed he kept a folder of half-written lyrics he never sent, afraid they wouldn't be welcome anymore. Around 2 a.m., Taehyung grew quiet again. His eyes lingered on Jungkook's profile. "You were the hardest person to lose," he said, "because you weren't just someone I cared about. You were the silence after every high note, the place my thoughts went when I wasn't trying to think of anything." Jungkook's hand tightened around his mug. He set it down and turned toward him. "Then, why did you let me go?" "I didn't," Taehyung said. "I just stopped knowing how to hold you." They both sat in that honesty for a while, letting it soak into the walls, the cushions, the breath between them. Jungkook looked at him, really looked. "I'm still here." Taehyung reached out, his fingers brushing against Jungkook's cheek. "I see that now." The touch wasn't heavy, but it lingered. That night, Taehyung didn't leave. They didn't share a bed, not in the way the world would assume. But Taehyung fell asleep on the couch again, head tilted toward Jungkook's side, and Jungkook stayed beside him, one arm draped over the back of the couch, his hand hovering near Taehyung's shoulder as if to protect a dream. In the early morning hours, when dawn barely began to paint the sky, Jungkook leaned in slightly and whispered, "Don't disappear again." Taehyung, half asleep, replied, "Only if you promise to keep the door open." And he did. What followed over the next few weeks wasn't a love story in the traditional sense. It wasn't kisses on rooftops or declarations of forever. It was showing up to the same studio without pretending they hadn't missed each other. It was sharing meals in quiet corners of the city and laughing until tears fell, remembering the versions of themselves that had existed before the silence. It was Jungkook finishing Taehyung's lyrics one night and leaving them on his desk without a note. It was Taehyung recording a harmony on Jungkook's solo without asking and Jungkook keeping it in the final mix. It was slow, painfully slow, but it was real. And then one day, during a quiet dinner with the rest of the group, Namjoon looked between them and said softly, "You two found your rhythm again." Taehyung looked at Jungkook. Jungkook smiled. "We're learning to listen," Jungkook said. And sometimes that was all it took.